It's one of the biggest questions in all of history. Why did the Roman Empire actually fall? Well, today we're diving into a really fascinating, pretty unconventional theory that has nothing to do with barbarians at the gates or a string of bad emperors.
So let's just jump right into this idea. The theory asks us to think about the Roman Empire less like a kingdom and more like a computer running a really specific operating system, an OS that, after centuries of incredible success, suddenly hit a piece of code it just couldn't process. So what was this operating system? Well, it was Rome's completely unique approach to religion and government, and it was built not on some strict top-down belief, but on practical, everyday action.
And this right here is the key insight. For the Romans, religion wasn't really about what you believed deep down in your heart. It was more like civic infrastructure, a shared language of loyalty, a set of public rituals you did to keep the pax diorum, the peace of the gods. As long as you did the rites, hey, you were a good citizen. It was the civic glue holding this huge, diverse empire together.
The core software of their OS even had a name, Interpretatio Romana. And this was, frankly, Rome's diplomatic genius. Instead of marching in and forcing everyone to worship Jupiter, they created this system of religious elasticity. So here's how it worked on the ground. When Rome conquered a new place, they'd find the local storm god and basically say, "Oh, you call him by that name? Huh, we know him as Jupiter." See what they're doing? They weren't erasing local culture, they were absorbing it. They were turning people who could have been rebels into active participants in the empire. I mean, that's way more efficient than ruling by brute force alone. But every operating system has its limits, right? And the Roman OS was about to run into a piece of code that it couldn't translate, it couldn't absorb, and it absolutely could not ignore. Okay, this is where you can really see the fundamental clash. The Roman polytheistic system was built on equivalence. But exclusivist monotheism, it introduced a totally alien logic. It wasn't your God is kind of like our God. It was my God is the only God and all of yours are false. You can just see how that would jam the gears of the Roman assimilation machine. There's just no room for translation there. And this is a really crucial point. For Rome, this wasn't some philosophical disagreement. By refusing to join in on the shared rituals that kept the whole state humming along, monotheists looked like they were rejecting the social contract itself. To the Romans, it was an act of political disloyalty. This quote from the historian Tacitus really gives us a window into the Roman administrative mindset. You can hear he's not really talking about theology. He's describing what he sees as a kind of civic separation, a refusal to integrate. And from his perspective, that was a direct threat to Roman order. So, faced with this unassimilable bug, what did Rome do? Well, its response wasn't to try and negotiate. It was to prove once and for all the superiority of its own operating system. Rome's actions were designed to be a public spectacle. Take the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE. That wasn't just a military win, no, it was a declarative act, a statement to the world that the Roman cosmic order was supreme and simply could not be challenged. You can see the escalation right here. First, the physical destruction of the rival headquarters. Then, a financial tool to really enforce that subordination. And then, the ultimate irony. The empire ends up adopting the very system it couldn't defeat. Let's just take a closer look at the Fiscus Judaicus, because it's a brilliant and frankly brutal piece of policy. By taking the Jewish temple tax and redirecting it to fund the temple of Jupiter, Rome literally forced a defeated people to pay for the worship of their conqueror's god. The message couldn't have been clearer. It was an act of fiscal subordination, basically saying, your God is not in charge here. He answers to the Roman order. But then, the great reversal. The bug wasn't quarantined. Instead, it took over the entire system. The empire adopted Christianity, and in doing that, it completely rewrote its own source code. And you can see just how profound that change was. The old OS was flexible. It was built on assimilation. A difference in belief was just regional variation. But the new OS, it demanded uniformity. Now, a difference wasn't variation, it was heresy. The empire traded its greatest strength, its flexibility, for a new, brittle rigidity. And the consequences of this, according to the source material, were catastrophic. The The empire lost its magic touch for absorbing new peoples. Diplomatic ties on the frontiers started to fray because theological squabbles, like with the Aryan tribes, suddenly became political deal breakers. The best and brightest talent started flowing from state administration into the church. The result was this gradual cultural contraction. So here's the bottom line. By ditching the system of assimilation that let it govern this incredibly diverse population by consensus, the empire was left with only one tool in its toolbox: coercion. And an empire that can only rule by force, well, that's an empire that's already started to crack. But, this story isn't just about Rome. The source uses this whole historical theory to make one last, really fascinating point about a glitch in our own operating systems. It's called the Semmelweis reflex. It's our all-too-human tendency to just instinctively reject new information if it challenges what we already think we know, no matter how strong the evidence is. It's named after this poor doctor who was mocked and basically ruined for suggesting surgeons should wash their hands, a discovery we now know saved countless lives. And the source argues that this reflex leads to something called cognitive hardening. It's what happens when our minds and our institutions become more rigid than they are fluid, when protecting the established ideology becomes way more important than actually searching for the truth. This applied to the Romans who couldn't adapt, and you know what? It applies to us today, whenever we run into a radical new idea about our own history.
And that really leaves us with this final, powerful question, doesn't it? It challenges us to look at our own beliefs, our own certainties, and ask ourselves, what untranslatable ideas might we be rejecting today simply because they don't quite fit into our current operating system?